Do we have a did you know?
No.
Yeah. Oh, 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 yeah. Yeah. Wake up, roll I am on it. Coffee in hand, got a plan, I can feel it. Life is good when I lean and start up right. Doing the work out of sight. Let's go, it's Mojo.
Rick, hail! It's Mojo Monday, my friend. How are you?
Man, I'm good. You're bringing the energy today, Brad. I
Yes,
love it.
sir. We need to. Let's go every
It's
Monday.
Monday.
What would the week be if you started Monday with low energy?
Ooh, it'd
Like,
probably be less productive and less fulfilling.
I think that's why I didn't go into corporate America, Rick. I think I thought I would think like, oh, it's Monday. And
Ooh.
I would go to work like, oh, it's Monday. But when you're an entrepreneur, when you're a solo proprietor or sole proprietor, you should get excited about Monday, right?
Well, there's a correlation between activity and impact and ultimately income. So why
Yeah,
wouldn't you get excited? You get to make a difference and enhance your life.
I love
So
it.
what's more invigorating than that?
Yeah, so I should start our talk today about how's your back? Kidding, because I know you were pulling weeds over the weekend. So we decided to actually title our talk "Pull the Weeds," right? Or stop. I don't even remember what we titled our talk. We'll put it in the title, but um, it's really a fascinating business analogy that we've kind of crafted for our talk this morning around pulling the weeds, right?
Well, it's always about, we try to come at life from the perspective of being more cool. We want to be cool. And this is the Dick Dillingham definition that I learned years ago at Keller Williams International in a class, but not COOL, but KOOL, keen
Yeah.
observer of life. And
Yep.
so to your point, yeah, I texted, we text every day about our steps and health goals and its accountability, which is brilliant and beautiful, and it maintains the relationship. But at the
Yeah.
end of the day, I said, yeah, I'm not sure how many steps they're counting because I'm bent over doing like baby steps in circles, pulling weeds. So yeah, I'm a little stiff and sore today, but my beds look much better, and the yard's starting to show up for the
I
season.
love it. So before we get into it, let's do our trivia. Did you know, my friend,
Well, the did you know today is how do you define a weed? Who defines and what are the qualifiers for a weed? And
for a week?
it's one of those cool things, man. A keen observer would know this. Most of us are just running through life, with scissors, is cutting into everything we can, and don't always notice the subtle
What makes
nuances.
a weed, right?
What makes a weed a weed? So stay with us, man. It's a fascinating answer,
Oh,
and there's a
all right.
philosophical overlay that'll surprise you.
So what did you learn? You were out in the yard pulling weeds. Let's kind of set this conversation up. What is this analogy of pulling weeds? How does it relate to business? Set us up, Rick Hale.
Well, sometimes I think I don't want to give away the entire, moral of the story, but sometimes removing something creates space for something better. And it's not always about planning more. It's about, eliminating things and distraction and it just creates clean air to run faster and farther. And, but the irony even in that is making sure that you're identifying those elements that you're deciding to keep or extract.
Yeah.
And not long ago, I did a wisdom. I was on track doing these Wisdom Wednesdays, and it was a 3 minute, 2.5 minute self video thoughts of being, again, keen observer. I was out pulling weeds, and I noticed where a nothing had been planted. There was a flowering something, and it was a weed. And I thought to myself, well, when does a weed stop being a weed and it just becomes a desirable? It's
It was a
growing,
pretty weed.
it's growing. Just yeah, but it was clearly a weed, but it was a pretty weed. And so part of the discussion today is also about making sure that we don't pull things we perceive weeds that actually have value. So there's two sides to the conversation.
Yeah, and I think, I'll take the flower bed for the analogy here for a second. Like, I think some people pull the weeds because they want the flower bed to look pretty. However, there's actually some biology to pulling the weeds because the weeds are sucking the nutrients out of the soil away from the flowers for them to actually bloom, for them to actually be their best version of themselves, right? So that flower bed analogy in business is, are there weeds in business? Are there weeds in our lives that are sucking the nutrients out of other areas of our life that would cause us to be the best version of ourselves, right? And
Exactly right.
I think obviously we pull weeds in a flower bed, but it's not as simple as just pulling a weed in business, right? Like there's first of all, you got to decide what's a weed, then you got to decide how to remove it or pull it or put it down or make it less important. And I really wanted to kind of focus our talk today on three points, right? So the first point is, how do we pull the weeds of distraction?
Hmm.
So in a flower bed, the weeds kind of distract from the beauty of the flowers, right? In business, are there things we do that distract us from the things we should do, or the things that give us the highest return on time, the highest return on investment? I was teaching a class over the weekend in one of our offices, and I was talking to it was they were doing a halftime show, which was fun. But I was explaining to these agents, I said, when I was new, I remember spending 2 weeks putting a newsletter together. I remember spending, probably 2 days trying to create a flyer. I remember times in my career where the new marketing idea derailed my life for a week trying to flesh out this new idea, right? Or we'll go to conventions or we'll go to trade shows, and any industry has this where, hey, here's the new shiny object, right?
Yeah.
How do we think about the distractions of business in terms of pulling the weeds?
Well, for one, I just remember Gary Keller teaching me in a mastermind in 2001, for gosh sakes. He's like, there's no job, and this showed up, by the way, in the book, The One Thing. There's no job too small to outsource, subcontract, delegate, or don't do if it interferes with what's most important. And so part of that is, a little bit of 80-20 rule, mindset rolled into that. But I think today's conversation is a little more specific around, it's not just what you can outsource, subcontract, or delegate. Those are all behavioral and activity based. But what do you literally remove so that there's room for prosperity, a little room for, and I think the bigger question should be, look over your shoulder, because the greatest test of where you're going is where you've been and what's been effective and what hasn't. And what hasn't been effective would be a weed. What have you invested time in? Look at your day planner for the last 30 days and decide where did you plant time or invest time, and there was no no reward or reap, in the harvest. And
Yeah.
then going forward, eliminate that from the equation completely. And so
Yeah.
again, it goes back to shiny objects, and maybe it's making lists instead of the two success list instead of a to do list, straight out of the one thing.
Yeah. I think of things like social media, Rick. I'm human. I'll find myself with the blank stare scrolling at times, right? And you realize you're not on there purposefully, you're on there for distraction. And we almost welcome distraction sometimes in our life because we want to get out of our own head or get out of our world, right? For a minute, just go into a place of distraction. Social media is great for that.
Mm.
Yet, if that is the thing that's keeping you from being productive, or that's the thing that's sucking the time in your calendar to not allow enough time for you to be productive, then that's a weed, right? It just depends on whether or not it's distracting from something greater.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. So it we're all trained to just add value, communicate, connect, and social media is the ultimate way to do that. But if you can't correlate input and an output that satisfies your goals, then that's a weed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a
And
weed.
we
It's
and
that
you
simple.
decide what's a weed, right?
Well, ultimately, you do. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
and
I think about AI right now. Um, it feels really intelligent to be leaned into AI right now. It feels really smart to be spending a considerable amount of time like working on things and interacting with AI. but I also have found myself going down, dissertations trying to get to a simple answer where I go into this long research project. Heck, we do it on Mojo Monday sometimes, right? Like we use AI to help come up with ideas and stuff. And I'll find myself 20 minutes later in a project or whatever they call them on AI, where you're just like, answer this question. Well, have you thought of this? Have you thought of this? Have you thought of this? Is that a distraction or is that a good thing? How do you decide?
I mean, it has to be outcome based. Is it an
Yeah.
efficiency, or to your point, a rabbit hole? And sometimes you start digging into something and you lose time and space, and you wake up on the other side realizing you'd completely missed the target. And the point today isn't that you're not going to do that. That's a human
Yeah.
experience and a human behavior. The question is, how often can you derail that distraction going forward so that you land one more effective task, one more effective conversation, one that really moves the needle? And it goes back to being very specific and targeting and sniping, and not, necessarily shotgunning in your efforts.
Yeah. Here's a quote. It says, "A weed doesn't look dangerous when it first appears. It's
Mm,
small, it's harmless, but left alone, it eventually competes with the plant you intended to grow."
yeah.
So
Well,
in business, right?
yeah.
It doesn't look harmless in the beginning, but at some point in time, it's competing with your output. It's competing with your productivity. It's competing with your results.
It is, and it's easier to pull a new weed than a mature, seasoned, rooted weed.
That is
I learned
very
that
true.
yesterday. There's some it takes two hands and a few pulls, and you still didn't get. If you didn't get the root, it's coming back. Just saying. So you need a complete extraction for it to be
Yeah.
effective. How about we add this layer? We're talking a lot about activities, Brad, and behavior. What about people?
Ooh, you didn't prep me on this one.
Why would
Uh,
I? This is a surprise attack.
Here's the thing. Everybody has that person when they call, you cringe to answer the phone.
Well, not because you don't necessarily appreciate them as a human being, but you know where the conversation's
They're a
going.
time distraction, right?
Yeah.
And everybody in business finds themselves in a situation where somebody goes, "Got a minute?" And it's never a minute, right? Yet you've got to decide what your time is worthy of.
Yeah.
And I think people is a part of that equation sometimes.
Well, and I'll remind you of this. Not everyone deserves you.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I'm not giving you the green light to be callous, cold, or reject people, but I'm saying you can defer, deflect, and delay, and then build in the efficiency we've been talking about and being more effective. And there's a saying, don't water the weeds. It's one of my favorite. I
Yep.
don't know where I heard that quote, but sometimes there are people that we either consciously or otherwise continually water that, and spark the fire. And when someone comes to me and says, got a minute, and I don't have a minute, it's hard not to be accommodating, as with my personality type. And I would argue that most real estate professionals have a high I, caring, kind demeanor. But my best advice is defer, deflect, or delay if it's not inside of your 20% and the things that matter most.
Yeah.
And I had a script, Brad, that I'd say, what, if it's truly 60 seconds, I've always got 60 seconds. If it's more than that, you deserve all of me and my focused attention and effort. Can we establish an appointment where I'm truly present for you because you matter?
Yeah.
And when
It
you play
almost
it like
takes
that,
60 seconds
you
just to
give
say
them
you're
literally, and then I would hold my hand up and look at my watch and go.
good.
And it's amazing how efficient people can be when truly given boundary and a timeline. Or they go, this is a big topic, and go, well, you deserve all of me. And right now I'm a bit distracted with other priorities. Let's set up some time. And here's what I've learned. Probably 85% of the time they resolve their own issue. They solve it. Or they recognize that it wasn't as big a deal as they thought because it was
Yeah.
emotionally charged potentially.
So you threw me a curveball. I'm going to throw you a curveball. What about personal life and the distraction of business becoming a weed in your personal life?
Ooh, yeah, that is a curveball. And I
Like at
think for
night.
those, if we're
Yeah.
committed to our craft and our business, it's really hard to turn it off. But I think this goes back to boundary and recognizing, for you to be the best version of yourself inside of your business, you also have to counterbalance with being the best person inside of your life personally. And I think because we're all human beings, everyone recognizes the value of being balanced to some degree, or at least counterbalanced. And so establishing boundary is brilliant. Like changing your voicemail to say calls, after 7 p.m. or return the following morning. Pick a time. I remember saying like at 6:30. Nobody's expecting or wanting a call at 6:30, and they'll usually even go, "Yeah, you can call me later in the day, tomorrow, or in the morning." But it just shows that you're tenacious and you're a professional. But if it's an emergency, hit me with 911 in a text, and it's pretty awesome how most people who respect and like you. Remember, I said earlier, not everyone deserves you. If there's lifters and leaners. And if they're just leaners and constantly leaning in and taking, that's a weed. Pull it, throw it. And but the rest, if it's truly an emergency, I'll step out for any call. But at the end of the day, if they realize you've got boundary and you've established it, most honorable people honor that, or will honor you with respect.
Yeah. All right, let's move forward.
So that was a good question. I'm not sure.
No, if you're going to throw me a curveball, I'm going to throw you one. So let's move on. Pull in the weeds of complexity. As business grows, as business scales, it does get a little more complex. You start to build out systems, you start to build out models, you start looking at more reports, more spreadsheets, more things. And then you want to fill the calendar with more meetings because you feel that makes you efficient. The question is, what's too complex? And what needs to be pulled from complexity, Rick?
I think it starts, I said it just a minute ago. It starts with getting clear on what your 80-20 is and what the 20% that matters most. If you're letting the 80%,
output, right? The output.
And if the 80%, it's not irrelevant, but it's not most relevant. I think it's just a matter of prioritizing. If you take care of the really big, important things every morning as early as you can, the rest of the day can be what it can be, and it's not going to derail your output. So part of this could be priority of time, and making sure that you don't delay and defer the really big things for later in the day when the rest of the world wakes up and just wants your attention, and it may not be part of your plan. And then you find yourself watering the weeds.
Yeah. Here's a quote. It says, "Perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away."
Ooh.
That's Antoine de Saint-Exupéry.
Yeah, he had another quote. There's another quote. I'm going to have to think about that for a minute.
Okay.
There is a quote. It did remind me of a quote, since we're quoting, and we're now, I feel like we're sword fighting a little bit over who's with the other. Choose not to drown in a shallow pool. I love that. If you're going to drown, make sure you're in the ocean. So think big, go big. Yeah, that's a fun quote too. But I think you're right. I think simplicity solves a lot of life's problems, because we spend a lot of time analyzing and dissecting and deciding versus doing. And what you're saying and what I hear in the conversation is, don't spend all this time prognosticating and predicting or hoping for or planning for. Get really clear on what matters and just go do the things that matter most and eliminate the noise.
There you go. All right. Our third talking point of the day, Rick Hale, pull the weeds of negativity. We live on habits, beliefs, and attitudes. However, we put a lot of weight to attitude, meaning how we feel, how we're thinking. And sometimes that feeling and those thinkings aren't serving us best, right? Like we'll quickly say, hey, that won't work. Or we'll quickly say, we've always done it that way. Or we'll quickly say the market's too hard, right? Like, are they limiting beliefs? Maybe on some level there's limiting beliefs, but they're also thoughts, right? And, Diana Kokoski used to teach us how our thoughts leads to our feelings, which it affects our actions, right? And negativity can disguise itself at times.
Right. You just landed the plane. Self-care is not a weed.
Okay.
And so if attitude and energy is everything, because we can only attract who and what we are, this is not a set it and forget it. in, strategy in life is to you don't just go on vacation once every 3 years and think that you're fully rested, recovered, and ready to serve. I think there's a daily strategy that has to be employed when it comes to focus energy around what to take away and not. Make sure you're not substituting more distraction for self care. That could be the number one thing you do every day. And the other thing is compressed days. Even what if compressed days? And when I say compressed, like you're not creating enough sacred space to tackle those big rocks, and then you're trying to double down and catch up and constantly playing catch up. That's stress, and stress is a weed.
Yeah.
And so maybe the idea is create better habits before bedtime so that you wake up an extra hour early, and then you've expanded your day versus compressing it, and you create more space to go tend the garden for some self-care so that the best you shows up. How are you
Yep.
doing that now? That's the proactive question you should ask. How am I loving myself at a maximum level that pays dividends for the people I love in my inner circle, and then I have enough left to give away to the people that are outside of that inner circle?
I love that. It takes courage to go down this path.
Some
You know,
self reflection for sure.
it takes courage to self-reflect. It takes courage to remove things. It takes courage to reframe your thoughts, right? The question, Rick, is where we need to land this plane is it's not specifically what should I add? It's really more what should I remove? That's the whole context of pulling weeds, right? It's a removal thing. It's not a go plant more weeds. It's how do we remove the weeds from our business? How do we remove the weeds from your flower bed? How do we remove the weeds in our personal life so that we can bloom and we can
Yeah.
blossom, right?
Yeah. Just because it used to work doesn't mean it's going to work going forward. So exactly right. What habits, behaviors, activities, and people need less space in your life so that you create a more fertile environment for the flowering plants to show up and thrive.
Yeah. Uh, it says to make room for the best, yet you sometimes have to let go of good. And that makes me think of good to great, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes good is the enemy of great, is one of the famous quotes. And sometimes good can be a weed.
Mm. Yeah, that lends itself to the conversation around complacency.
Yeah,
Have you fallen prey to habits and complacency that, if a few weeds were removed, create sacred space for better choice?
I love it.
Yeah,
Did you know, sir? I think it actually kind of plays into this.
it totally plays into this. So good work setting us up today, Brad. So mostly, so is how do you determine who decides when a weed is a weed? And obviously, there's an element of subjectivity. And by the way, some weeds, if they give you extreme joy and it's just a frivolous activity, it's your thing, then just realize when you make a decision, when you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else. And a
Yeah,
weed will any form of activity, behavior, or person will eat up sacred space. And what we're suggesting today is just be calculated, be purpose built, and be intentional. And so, by the way you determine a weed being a weed, it comes down to the functionality of that. For example, a weed, what's a weed to a farmer? What about medicine to an herbalist? Food to a forager, beauty to a garden, and survival to bees and wildlife. In fact, as an example, dandelions, the golf courses fight them like crazy, but pollinators depend on them early in the spring. And some people actually eat them in their salads or make tea from the roots. So it's all about functionality. And they took it, I did a little bit of homework and put some thought into that, but there's also a philosophical layer that's fascinating to me. Sometimes society labels people, ideas, music, and behaviors in the same way as either useful or not. And, weeds are often disruptors, if you will. And then a few decades later, maybe not even decades, things move fast these days, that weed becomes the thing everyone values. So
yeah,
it comes back to labeling effectively and the higher power you have to make choices and decide.
I love it. Simply, a weed is a plant growing anywhere that's not wanted.
Yeah, that's not serving you,
Yeah,
even differently stated.
yeah. Rick Hale, What is today, my friend?
Today's Mojo Monday, my man.
I
Monday,
love-
Monday, Monday. Let's go. Make it great.
Mojo Monday, fun and fired up. I'm on my way, let's go. It's Mojo. Life is best on Mojo Monday. Big grin, check in, how you doing? Little spark
Man, that
in your
song's
step,
catchy.
now it's moving.